Is Bitcoin on the cusp of another crash? Well, let's talk about it. Let's dive into the video. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward. And let's dive into it. We're inside this black channel. In fact, we're deviating below it. In fact, we see downside wicks and even in recent times, weekly closes below this black channel, but this orange region is generally created here for those bargain buying opportunities. We'd see downside wicking in the past. Now we're seeing candle closes, but generally this is still that downside deviation region where price tends to find support, where we see liquidity grabbing before price recovers back above the bottom of the channel, which is 59,110. And actually weekly closing above this level would see a reclaim of the bottom of the channel as support, so as to enable a move right across the channel. And we've seen so many intra-channel moves here. With this downside deviation, there is scope for recovery back above the bottom of this channel. I'm giving this recovery 2 weeks time for Bitcoin to try and find a way back above 59,110. And at the moment, we are seeing quite a bit of volatility in and around this region. We've seen a great reaction in recent times, but it's really important for price to hold this orange region, and we're actually holding it quite nicely. We've got a bit of space above here, and actually maybe zooming in could be a bit better here to show that we are going to be meandering around this level of approximately 55,800. This is the recent weekly lows here that need to be held, and we're slightly tilting towards downside, slinking below here, but yesterday we were above there with a bit of space, so we're going to be sinusoidally performing this slinking up, slinking down. We're going to be meandering around this level, so really important for price to close above this level. But generally speaking, why is this channel around this region? Because we can see that this is a red region, this is a green region, and this channel is sitting on top of this green region. And what's that all about? This is generally the point of rejection from the previous bull market tops, which were acting as resistance. And now we've seen in recent months, especially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-month support. So an old point of rejection is acting as a multi-month support here. And we've seen many downside wicks in the process of this retesting of this green region as support. We've seen a very long downside wick last month even, and we're seeing another long downside wick this month. But by the end of August, we need to see price reclaim 59,110, which happens to be the bottom of that channel. We're not too far away from it, but we have almost a full month to reclaim this region as support. We have 3 weeks or so just about to reclaim this region as support, and there isn't much price movement towards the upside that we need to experience to get back there. It's only around $4,000, so it's not impossible to get above here, and the monthly close inside or even better above the green region. That would be yet another successful retest for 6 months in a row, which would be pretty phenomenal to get that monthly close above this region to solidify it as a support. And thus far, we've seen a 29% correction in Bitcoin's price action, and it's already recovered quite a fair amount of that correction. We're currently minus 21%. It was minus 29%. So a bit of recovery has already occurred. And if we look to previous corrections, this is definitely the deepest one in the cycle. Not long ago, we saw 23%, 21%, 22, 20%, 23%. Even if we move on here, you can see that I missed a correction here. This was 25%. So this was the deepest in the cycle. Notice how, in fact, this was the deepest in the cycle. And then this one became the deepest one in the cycle. And then now this one's the deepest in the cycle. So we're getting progressively deeper and deeper pullbacks in this cycle. So that's really important to note, because that's an interesting tendency that's deviating away from what we've seen before in the pre-halving period of 22% corrections, roughly speaking. So we are getting a bit deeper in those corrections. But what we have to mention about this correction is that it took place in a week and a half, less than a week and a half, in fact. Whereas previous corrections were 45, 42 days approximately. The 25% correction from a little bit earlier on was 42 days long, and 49 days where was this 23% correction. It took 2 weeks to see this 22% correction, and 63 days for 22% and 20% each correction to occur, and only 3 weeks here in early 2023. So the whole point is that we got the deepest correction in the shortest amount of time possible. So it's based on this historical data that we're seeing here. It's likely that the bottom is in on this correction, because we've already satisfied the depth part of the historical retraces, and we've done it in record breaking apologies time. So those are some really important aspects to note about price, and a weekly close above this level here would be a very solid confirmation that this correction has bottomed already. So maybe we do rally higher. For example, let's talk about a potential scenario. Maybe we do rally in here and reject from here, then maybe we'll see another pullback. But it will be really important to see how price reacts around this orange region. Still, it would need to hold the bottom of this orange region as a support. But really important that this 60,600 region, or more specifically 59,110, really important that we don't turn that region into a point of rejection on this upcoming rebound to the upside. And at the moment, we are short-term dipping, and that makes sense. Before we talk about that next chart, of course, it makes sense because there is a small, potentially insignificant CME gap around here. That's around 53,600 and 54,500. There is a small CME gap here. It's only 2.5% away from current prices. And if we need to fill this CME gap, then it's better to fill it when we're relatively close to it, rather than having to rally all the way here and have to then retrace quite significantly to fill this CME gap. Not all CME gaps need to get filled, and I'm not quite sure that we need to fill this one, but it would make total sense if we need to dip into this region to fill that CME gap, and once we fill that CME gap, establish some support essentially at these lows right over here before flicking up towards the upside to really try and fill this larger CME gap, which is so much more important. And notice how 59,110 is just below the very beginning of this CME gap right over here. So ideally, we would need to fill the CME gap, or at least begin filling the CME gap at 59,415, because doing so would see price reclaim the bottom of that channel that I mentioned earlier on in the video. You can see right over here that this is 59,110. And of course, given the declining nature of this channel, maybe next week that's going to represent a price point a little bit lower than here. Maybe that's going to be $59,000 for Bitcoin. But the fact remains the same, that we need to simply rally to this CME gap to reclaim the reaccumulation range. And this is what it's all about. This is the reaccumulation range that Bitcoin has been in for, well, since mid-March. It's been many, many months since then. Any downside deviation below this range low of the reaccumulation range, this is where we've seen great reactions to get us back into the range. And we need to see another reaction like this to stop the bleeding here. We need to see another reaction to get back into this range. And we've seen similar downside deviations below similar ranges in the past throughout this cycle. So we've been having a good track record at producing downside wicks below the range low before snapping back into the range. It is becoming a complicated range here for Bitcoin, but only a few weeks ago, we deviated in candle-bodied form below this range low before breaking back above it. Of course, to form a lower high, but still we managed to revisit this all-important range. And it's really important that this range continues, because historically, that is exactly what we've seen in the past. We've seen, in fact, in 2020, two historical ranges develop, one on top of the other, and it's this sort of reaccumulation that we see, this sideways price action, that enables buyers and sellers to exchange hands and buyers to grow in strength in an otherwise strong uptrend. And it's this reaccumulation phase that precedes the parabolic phase in the cycle. So we are in this post-halving reaccumulation period. It is a difficult period to experience with all these downside deviations that we never really saw in the previous cycles, but it's a phase that's going to precede the post-halving parabolic upside phase. And if history is any indicator, historically, it takes 160 days after the halving to see a breakout into the parabolic phase of the cycle. We're only around 112 days, 100 and maybe 14, 15 days at this point. So we're still a little bit ahead of schedule when it comes to a breakout. However, 2 months more and we'd align with historical breakout moments. It would be in line with history to break out sometime in September, mid-September, maybe even late September. But until then, we're still just consolidating, we're still just downside deviating. But for this to continue, this historical tendency of reaccumulation after the halving, Bitcoin needs to reclaim this range. It's not too far away from it at this moment, but it does need to reclaim this range. Does it have to do it this week? Not necessarily, because we've seen in the past that 2 weeks can be relatively okay for price to maintain below the range. I think this could be another repeat in the future. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks would be okay to see price just deviate here for a little while longer. But of course, the sooner it reclaims this level, the better. But it's really important that this old range low of 60,600 of support doesn't turn into a new resistance, because that's where things could get a bit complicated for Bitcoin's price action. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Thank you so much for everybody who liked yesterday's video. Thanks to I came back today earlier than I expected to, but if we get 1,500 likes for this video, I'll be back even tomorrow with a brand new video. So feel free to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll speak to you very soon.